It's dusk. You're crouched with 11 other people around a dying fire, and something is moving in the grass. Nobody has a title. Nobody has a badge. Nobody was voted in this morning. But in the next 3 seconds, this group needs someone to make a decision, or everyone dies. So who talks? For roughly 300,000 years, that question got answered again and again in every single human group that ever existed, with no constitutions, no thrones, no armies to enforce anything. And somehow, it worked. Well enough that you're alive right now, reading this sentence, descended from people who got that answer right over and over for thousands of generations in a row. Here's what you probably assumed happened. The biggest guy, the scariest guy, the one who could beat everyone else in a fight, he just took over. That's what happens with chimpanzees. That's what happens in every nature documentary about dominance. It is almost completely wrong for humans, and the real answer is stranger, and it's going to change how you look at every boss, every president, and every alpha you've ever met. Because it turns out, for most of human history, we didn't just tolerate strongmen, we had systems built to destroy them. Let's start with the animal we like to compare ourselves to the most, chimpanzees. In chimp troops, leadership is simple, it's physical. The alpha male holds power through strength, intimidation, and violence, and he keeps that power by beating challengers into submission. Primatologist Frans de Waal documented this extensively at the Arnhem Zoo colony in the Netherlands, starting in the 1970s. Alliances, betrayals, brutal power struggles that looked almost Shakespearean. For a long time, anthropologists assumed early humans worked the same way. Big guy wins, big guy rules. Then, in the late 1990s, anthropologist Christopher Boehm published something that flipped this idea upside down. He studied dozens of hunter-gatherer societies around the world, modern ones that still live close to how our ancestors lived, and found the exact opposite pattern. He called it the reverse dominance hierarchy. In plain terms, the group as a whole actively works together to prevent any one person from becoming dominant. Not occasionally, constantly, deliberately. Take the Kung San people of the Kalahari Desert, studied for decades by anthropologist Richard Lee starting in the 1960s. If a hunter brings back a huge kill, the kind of thing that should make him a hero, the group doesn't celebrate him, they insult him. One Kung hunter told Richard Lee directly, when a young man kills a big animal, he starts to think of himself as a chief, so the group makes sure that never happens. They'll look at a massive kudu he dragged back after a 2-day hunt and say something like, "You call this meat? I wouldn't even bother picking this up." It's called insulting the meat, and it's not cruelty, it's maintenance. It's a deliberate, culturally enforced habit designed to stop pride from turning into power. Because here's the thing anthropologists realized: humans have exactly the same drive toward domination that chimpanzees do. We just built something chimps never built, a community-wide alarm system against it. Gossip, ridicule, public shaming, ostracism, and in the most extreme, repeated cases, execution by the group. Boehm found examples across unrelated cultures on different continents where a man who tried to bully or dominate others was, in the most serious cases, killed collectively by the very group he tried to rule. Not by one rival, by consensus, quietly agreed on and carried out together. Think about what that means. For most of human existence, trying to become a tyrant wasn't a bold power move. It was one of the most dangerous things you could possibly do. So if that's true, if we spent hundreds of thousands of years actively hunting down anyone who tried to seize power, how did we end up a few thousand years later bowing to kings, emperors, and pharaohs who owned entire nations? Something had to change the entire equation, and it didn't happen through force. Here's what nobody tells you about ancient leadership. It wasn't earned through fear, it was earned through generosity. In the 1960s, anthropologist Marshall Salins studied leadership structures across Melanesia and the Pacific Islands and identified a role we now call the big man. A big man had no formal authority, no crown, no army. What he had was the ability to give things away. He'd work relentlessly, organizing labor, growing extra crops, raising pigs, not to hoard wealth, but to give it away at massive public feasts, and the entire community would watch who gave the most. Status wasn't seized, it was donated into existence. The moment a big man stopped being generous or started acting like he was better than everyone else, his influence evaporated. People simply stopped listening to him. This is the opposite of the fear-based hierarchy we imagine from history books. It gets stranger. In 1994, archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating a site in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. What he found rewired an entire field of archaeology. Massive carved stone pillars arranged in circles, built 11,600 years ago, thousands of years before agriculture, before pottery, before the wheel. To build something like this, you need hundreds of people coordinated over years. You need someone organizing labor, food, and logistics on a scale hunter-gatherers were never supposed to be capable of. Which means organized leadership may have existed even before farming, possibly built around ritual and feasting, not warfare. Archaeologist Brian Hayden calls this competitive feasting theory, the idea that some of the earliest leaders on Earth rose to influence not by conquering people, but by throwing the best parties history had ever seen and turning generosity into a currency of trust. I have to pause here for 1 second because this is genuinely one of my favorite discoveries in all of human history, and if this kind of thing fascinates you as much as it fascinates me, this channel exists entirely to dig up stories like this. So if you haven't already, this is a good moment to hit subscribe because it means a lot more than the view count does for a channel like this one, and it directly decides whether I get to keep making these. Okay, back to it, because it gets even more interesting. This pattern, earned trust over brute force, isn't just ancient history, it's still measurable today. Anthropologists Christopher von Ruden and Michael Gervin spent years studying the Tisane, an indigenous group in the Bolivian Amazon who still live largely off hunting, fishing, and small-scale farming. They wanted to know scientifically what actually makes someone a respected leader in a small-scale society. Their data found 3 factors mattered most. Physical formidability, yes, but also generosity and social skill, the ability to resolve conflict and speak persuasively. Physical strength alone barely predicted influence at all. What predicted influence was whether people trusted you to act in the group's interest instead of your own. Sit with that for a second, because it's a genuinely uncomfortable truth. The oldest, most tested, most evolutionarily proven leadership strategy on Earth was never domination. It was trustworthiness. Every tyrant in human history has actually been fighting against 300,000 years of hardwired human instinct that says we do not follow people who only serve themselves. So how did some humans eventually get away with it anyway? How did kings happen? The turning point lines up almost exactly with the invention of agriculture, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. Before farming, there was very little to steal. You couldn't hoard meat, it rotted. You couldn't hoard status past your last hunt. The leveling mechanisms had nothing large enough to fail against. But grain can be stored, land can be owned, surplus can be guarded. For the first time in human history, there was something worth defending with force, and someone had to control the granary, the irrigation, the storage, the decisions about who eats and who doesn't. And once a small group controls the surplus everyone depends on, the balance of power that took hundreds of thousands of years to build starts to crack. The gossip, the ridicule, the collective enforcement, all the tools a band of 30 people use to keep a bully in check, simply stop working at the scale of a city of 30,000. You can shame a man in your own camp. You cannot personally shame a king you've never met, guarded by soldiers who are paid by that same king. Archaeological evidence backs this up directly. At sites like Sungir in Russia, dated to around 34,000 years ago, archaeologists led by Otto Bader uncovered the burial of a child, buried with thousands of painstakingly carved ivory beads, the kind of wealth that would have taken thousands of hours of skilled labor to produce. A child, too young to have earned that status through hunting, generosity, or skill. which means even that early, status could sometimes already be inherited, not earned, a quiet crack in the egalitarian wall thousands of years before crowns existed. So the switch from earned leadership to inherited power wasn't a single invention. It was surplus plus scale plus time slowly overwhelming a system that had kept human ego in check since before we were fully human at all. And that leaves us with something genuinely uncomfortable to think about. The instinct to resist domination didn't disappear. It's still in you, right now, today. It's why you feel a specific kind of anger at a boss who takes credit for your work. It's why he thinks he's better than everyone else is still one of the harshest things you can say about a person in any culture on Earth. That reaction is 300,000 years old. It's not opinion, it's inheritance. I'm curious about something. I want you to actually answer this in the comments, not just read past it. In your own life, who is the person you'd actually trust to speak first if something went wrong right now? Not the loudest person, not the one in charge on paper, the one you'd trust. Tell me who that is for you and why.
Let's go back to where we started. Dusk, 12 people, something moving in the grass. You now know that whoever spoke first in that moment probably wasn't the biggest person in the group, and definitely wasn't self-appointed. They were the one the group had already quietly, collectively decided to trust through 1,000 small moments of generosity, competence, and restraint that came before this one. And if any of them had ever tried to use this moment to grab permanent power over the rest of them, the very same people now looking to them for survival would have turned on them just as fast. That tension between needing someone to lead and refusing to be ruled isn't a flaw in human nature. It might be the single oldest political idea our species ever had, older than writing, older than farming, older than cities. We didn't inherit kings. Kings are the exception. We inherited something quieter and honestly more impressive, 300,000 years of ordinary people refusing to kneel to anyone who hadn't earned it. Every time you feel that flicker of resentment towards someone who has power but hasn't earned your trust, that's not weakness. That's the oldest instinct you have, still working exactly the way it was built. The question is whether we still know how to use it.